Hello to the October 10th, 2025 Club Cubase livestream. My name is Greg Undo and I'm the host of the livestream today. If you've not attended a livestream before, how it works is you can simply ask questions in the live chat field or send questions in advance by emailing clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase that you're running. So if it's Cubase LE, AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, that information is helpful. Also, if we could indicate which version number, so if it's 12, 13, or 14 in the operating system, that information is also helpful in solving or answering questions. We should have an index that is compiled at the end of the live stream with timestamps. And this will allow you to quickly navigate afterwards to find particular topics that you want to search out for. And if you wanted to search for topics that have been covered in previous live streams, you could go to cubaseindex.com. And we want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating that website. When you ask a question, if you don't see an immediate response, if we could avoid asking the same question repeatedly, we'll go through all the questions chronologically as asked. So just a quick heads up with that so we don't need to repeat the same question. As we're kind of we have two people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They just really want to make it a better community experience for everyone. So we'll give a special thanks to them. Also, we will give a special acknowledgement to Jazz Dude for his work with the Cubase Nation Discord. It's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. And so once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work with Yamaha Corporation of America, and I primarily focus on Steinberg products. And I'm presenting from the United States outside of Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria, Virginia. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. And with that, we will go ahead and begin. All right, so you see Jazz Dude just mentioning Mix Key Beta. So it's a new kind of utility for stacking up different audio devices for streaming purposes, and it's a free public beta as currently, so everyone could go check that out. First question we have is from Mark in Little Rock. It says, trying to install Cubase 14 Pro onto an Intel Monterey Mac in our band studio. Sound engineer is nearly advanced Parkinson's, so he's the man now. It says, I activated 14 online. Already using code. There's existing Cubase download manager. It fails. I downloaded the latest version. I run it. It fails. And I got a choice to quit now. Question, is there a DMG file available so that we could direct download without having to use Steinberg Manager app? So probably if we just come directly to the website. Let's see if we'll just do a quick Google search for Cubase 14 download. And here you could, so let's say if we want to come over here, so you can say, okay, we will do the installation of different content sets. And you should have all of the different, so here's the application. I'll download it quickly myself. So we'll get this download started here while I'm on the live stream. So you should be able to install it directly from there. So we have a question, is there DMG file? So we'll see what file format this is. Okay, it says last session I tried downloading various Steinberg Manager apps. The second download would commence. The download stops despite being online and all the videos playing fine. Okay. So I haven't had any problems with any of my Macs. We'll see what the actual file is here. So here's a DMG file when it's downloaded. So let me just reread. Is there a DMG file so I could download it without having to use? All right, so we could just do it right from there. All right, so we see from Watch Addicts, it says last question, last session. I tried downloading various major apps. The second the download would commence, the download stopped despite being online. So, I mean, you just saw I just downloaded the whole install file right there. So, all right, so we see Jazz Dude on, who's been helping Mark. And we see Stefan joining from Sweden. All right, and we see from Watch Addict says downloaded that above from the list, ran into Steinberg, ran into download stopping immediately, all other web pages functioning smoothly with no interruptions like that. So, you know, I would try perhaps another browser, but, you know, you saw me just download the file and it's in my downloads folder. Okay. It says I'm downloading in the same year, same everything Mac, just finished quickly. It's 2015.5 Mac. Okay. All right, we see Jan from Cubase Index on. All right, so we see just comment from Watch Addicts 12. Mark says it's just odd that none of the Cubase managers will download, or in the case of the existing manager, won't work. If fails, then the quit now option. I mean, so let's just check out. I mean, Monterey is already, 4 operating systems old. So the supported operating systems here on 14 is going to be, I think Monterey was 12, if memory serves right. So you might be kind of on the edge of, being, so we're at, 13, 14, 15, and then we have 26 out now. So you do have kind of an older operating system, and otherwise you may be stuck at that operating system. Okay. All right, so we just see Watch Addicts 12, so hopefully I'll just see if there's, I know you see some other comments here, but I did catch the earlier post. All right, so you see your question is there a DMG file? So it looks like this installer is a DMG file. When we open up our downloads, so let me know if you see it differently. All right, we see Val checking in from Vienna. He says he's happy to finally be on the whole live stream again. Great to see you on. We have Observation Audio sending greetings from Hollister, California. So we have Dunex says from the UK, says Cubase 14 Pro latest version on the Mac. M1 Macs have an issue that when I select a track, its volume reduces significantly. I must have pressed something as it was always just fine before. So let me know if you have perhaps a controller, a controller, depending on, if you have a controller that might affect, something like a little MIDI fader box, or if your MIDI controller keyboard has something like that on. And it would be interesting if you disconnected that and if you select the track and we see if the volume changes. So sometimes when it goes to select a track, some controllers will immediately take the value of that track, and if the controller is misbehaving, it may send whatever the value of where the physical controller knob is set to. So if you have a controller, try disconnecting that and see if that resolves this situation or changes the behavior, and then we could go from there if you have that figured out. And it's great to have you on the live stream. All right, Fly-V from Vince from Winnipeg just says, what would you say about traveling with a new laptop? Not if I don't have to, right? I'm going to use my old laptop for downloading presets, etc. So if you have a laptop, you probably purchased it to operate remotely, which is a good reason to have a laptop. So as long as it's protected and you're able to make sure that no one takes your laptop while you're traveling, you'll be in good shape. I've traveled with laptops for 32, 33 years, so and I've had very few problems with laptops. All right, we see Mark Rabin on from Montana. Says, oh yeah, let's all learn tons. Thank you, Greg and Jazz Dude, in advance. I'm psyched to be here. All right, we'll send a big woof to Mark Rabin's dog, Stella, who's a very loyal Club Cubase attendee. All right, we have Roland Stuff. Says, glad to be back on since missing last few live streams. Hope everyone's well. It's great to have you back. All right, Observation Audio says, when using bass management with my subwoofer, is there a way to configure a 2.1? It works with my 7.1 for Atmos, but no options for 2.1. So most of the time when you're dealing with 2.1, it's not a 0.1, so you could have so most of the time when people are doing a 2.1 system, they may be running a subwoofer in conjunction with stereo speakers. But the 0.1 indicates that it is a discrete channel, like that you could send signals directly to it discretely. Most people, when they think 2.1, they're running a crossover they're running the signal out of they're running a stereo audio signal out of the system. And from there, it goes into the subwoofer, like the stereo out into the subwoofer. And the subwoofer will have a crossover and then simply send the frequencies above the crossover point to the main left and right speakers, but it's not a 0.1 because it's just a stereo channel configuration. So that's why you may see the distinction. Whereas if it's a 5.1, that subwoofer, the LFE, is a separate distinct channel and also in 7.14. But if you're just dealing with stereo, when you go to export your stereo mix down, and if you had stuff that was going into your LFE, then none of that would be included. And most people aren't going to be mixing down to a 3-channel MP3 or a 3-channel file for delivery. So if you're going to be doing like a 2-channel system, You'd want to properly run the crossover, not at the software level, but at the particular subwoofer itself. So let me know if that makes sense for you. Let me just clear my throat quickly here. All right. All right, and Mark Rabin has kind of a good comment to, I guess it's Dunks or Dunks, his comment about his, when he selects a track, the volume reduces significantly. So also check to, see if when you select a track, if the actual fader is moving. But there is, as Mark pointed out, which is a great point, if you're using the control room, maybe you have the dim turned on. Or, so check this, let us know if when you select the track, if the track itself is, changing volume there, or if it's just changing volume in the volume, like the monitoring level volume. And then maybe you could check to see if like dim or any other settings. Let us know if you're using the control room, because there's other things that could affect the gain structure from there if you have control room plugins. And also you'll see let's just come over here where we could you could use the if you go to the levels control here, and then there's also this little button that says activate to use after fader listen mode. You could try toggling that button in the control room if you don't have dim enabled here. So something else to look at. Thanks for bringing that point out, Mark. All right, Robert Gentry asks, can you explain an easy way to comp several takes of multi-track drums, 12 tracks per pass, that are overlapped on the same tracks and location? Okay, so let's come over here. All right, so we'll just add a bunch of audio tracks here. All right, so say we have 12 tracks. Okay, I'm going to just put these into a folder. So I'm going to right click on all the tracks, and we will choose to move selected tracks to new folder. And in the folder, this way I could record, enable, monitor, and kind of I could apply group editing. So I'm going to now come over here. Let's just do a quick, we'll do several passes of audio recording here. All right, just change my input. Okay, so now we have our input routed. So let's go ahead and do a couple of passes. Okay, so let's say we have pass 1. Let's do another record pass. Okay, pass 2. Oh, let me arm all the tracks. Okay, let's do another pass of recording. Okay, so let's say we have 3 passes and we want to be able to effectively comp and select different takes between all those. I place these into a folder. I'm going to enable group editing. Now, one of the tricks, and this may seem counterintuitive, is just to open up the lanes on all of the tracks. Okay, so now we have our lanes open. We've enabled on the folder group editing. So what I want to do now is I'm going to grab the little hand tool, which is our comp tool. And now that all the lanes are open, I could just come right over here and just choose to comp. And when I comp one of the passes, then all of the passes will change accordingly, but they probably won't change until the lanes are turned on. So I'm going to select a different lane here, and you can see that as I change it on one of them, that will be reflected on all of the different passes. So if we want to end up with the middle track at the very end, I change one with all the lanes open, and then that will just reflect that comp on all of the different tracks. So do your recording passes, put it into a folder, and you may want to put it into a folder because then you could just arm the folder and monitor the folder instead of having to do it for each track. So after you've done the recordings, you could enable group editing, open up the lanes, expose the lanes for all the tracks, and then use the comp tool, which looks like a hand, and then you can make your comp decisions accordingly here, and that will be applied to all the tracks. But I don't think it really happens until all of the lanes are visible. So that could be kind of the missing step that is not as intuitive or obvious for people. So let me know, Robert, if that's helpful. All right, Uno Memento from Finland sending a big woof to Montana to Stella, Mark Raben's dog. All right, we have VS Terra Nova checking in from Amsterdam. Thanks for joining us again. All right, Kashif asks, when will Cubase 15 be released? So generally we don't announce releases until they're actually out. So my standard answer would be when it's done and ready. So, but as soon as it is released, we'll do a live stream afterwards, going through all the new features in detail. All right, Mark Raben just says it did 3 new originals this week in the pay session during Tuesday's stream. All right, that's great. Wonderful to see Millard Brown on from Pennsylvania. Okay, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. Okay. All right, so we see a comment from Mark Raven says, so my last sitting with Cubase is incredible. So much clicked for me, so much that has been echoing up in my brain, finally applied. So amazing. So it's great. Always wonderful to hear that. All right, FlyV asks, question, what is this new thing, Mix Key from Steinberg? So what Mix Key is going to allow you to do is, let's say if you're doing streaming and you wanted to bring in, audio from like a USB microphone, you wanted to bring in audio from a website, audio from Wavelab, audio from Cubase, your microphone, any different type of audio source, you can now just come over here and you could have your source pool. So whether it's, different microphones, audio interfaces, we could bring all of these different sources together where, where we could just simply come over and say, okay, I want to hear this in my headphones. We could set up like your inputs, your outputs, what you're monitoring. And this way it's kind of like a software mixer for different applications for different audio devices where everything can kind of be mixed together at kind of a software level, so that we don't, this allows us to kind of route audio from different applications directly into one central source that can be fed out to OBS, or if you're doing a Zoom meeting, stuff like that, we could just use Mixkey for that. So it's a very clever kind of utility. So it's in public beta now, so you could download it free and start playing around with it. Check it out. See, Watch Addicts just says, yeah, end of road, obsolete, is Monterey, yeah, stuck. So yeah, sorry about that. Some operating systems kind of seem like they have a planned obsolescence. I guess it allows you to buy a new computer to update. All right. So Mark Rabin just asks, so a couple tricks I wish I knew. Best way to select a bunch of tracks or mixer channels and color the bunch. Okay, so let's say I want to, we'll come over here. I want to colorize a bunch of channels all at once. Okay, so I'm going to select the channels, and we can do this in the mixer. I'm just going to, at this point, go to my colors, and then I could just come right over here and change all the colors. So just once you have it selected, and if we wanted to do that in the mix console, I think we would just hold down like Alt-Shift, change one of the colors. Looks like maybe not in the mix console, but you just do it in the project window. Just kind of come right over here and just change colors as you see fit. All right, we have Sounds by Themo, just says hello from Sheboygan. All right, so we see Michael Teams checking in from Weatherford, Texas, here on a sunny, bright autumn day. All right, so Mark Rabin just telling Michael Teams, just asking how's Texas, and says we get snow on Monday. So I kind of like the snow. Everything's nice and quiet. All right, so Mark Rabin has received 1 gallon of chocolate chip ice cream from Michael Teams. Rob Schmedicke just asks, hello, Greg Rob from Tarpon Springs. Great to see you on from Florida. Is there a best workflow with unmixing spectral layers? Is bouncing a track after you've unmixed it have an impact on the layers? So the layers will still be intact, and we'll show this for everyone's benefit. So if we come over, all right, so this is one that a project that I've unmixed already. So just, all right, so we've unmixed it, and then we could basically see our layers. All right, let me just make sure my audio connections are. All right, so what Spectral Layers does, when we do an unmix, we can just simply, we do an unmix song. This way I could So let's say I want my vocals in the project. You know, what I could do now is just simply drag the vocals over. So we make a track of the vocals. And as we've done this, now what's going to happen is, so let's say the original track. So if we solo like the original track, now that we dragged it out, the vocals have been kind of taken out. So this is basically playing back all of the layers, and we've taken one of the layers out. So if I wanted to treat this as a separate file, I could just come right over here, go to audio to bounce selection. And now in this, we could still have, you know, all of our layers can still be accessible, but, you know, now it's an audio file that I could export. I could pass it on to someone without having to go through Spectral layers to do that. So we could just simply come over here, take that one particular layer, and I usually choose you could render in place or just do a bounce selection and turn that into an audio file that you could easily edit or pass on to other people. So that's how I personally do it. So let me know if that makes sense. And great to see you on, Rob. And just see next question is, should I just bounce layers I've dragged into the project? So I think that's the best way. All right, Roland Stuff says, hi Greg, what settings are used to help create harmony voices, get harmonies roughly right on the first attempt? Whenever I use it, they're way off base, and I know it's me not setting it up properly. So generally what you want to do when kind of creating a harmony is, so let me just open up a quick project here. Is, you know, if you have kind of the basis of the harmonies as like a chord track, you know, if you have a chord track first. So let's say I have a chord track here in my project that's empty, and I want to, like, as we're playing this, I'm going to take the guitar part here
The day we first met
and drag that to the chord track. And we have our chords. So now what I want to do is just to take my vocal part and say, okay, I want to take this phrase and let's generate harmonies from my audio menu. And let's do 2 harmony voices. I'll just drop their level slightly here. And now
It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our...
And let's say instead of a soprano voice, I could come over here to the chords and I'll say, okay, instead of that being a soprano, let's make it a tenor harmony. So, because we're kind of starting off, so...
It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home. You look my way.
So then basically it's using the chords that are derived from the guitar part that we drag to the chord track. And then when it's creating the harmonies, it's going to basically just use the chords from the chord track as the harmonic basis so that it works musically. And then you have the ability, if you go into the chords area, to just change whether you want it to be, you know, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and you get an alternate soprano, alto, tenor, bass voice as well. So make sure that the chord track is active, and then that should make more sense musically for you. All right, Michael Teams is granted Matt Elston 1 gallon of tuxedo cream ice cream. All right, great to have you on, Matt. And Mark Rabin has received 1 gallon of chocolate chip ice cream and some goodies for Stella as well. Apparently, Mark Rabin has just bought some chocolate chip ice cream just about an hour ago before getting more from Michael Teams. All right, John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin, just saying hello and thanks to Greg and the Livestream crew. Hit that like button. Don't be dumb like him, he says. I think John's a pretty smart guy. Okay. All right, so wonderful to see Rick from Uptown Whittier, California, enjoying the live stream. It's Bratman Studio. Michael Teams is granted 1 gallon of Frangelico orange ice cream. That's a new flavor, I think. It's first instance of Frangelico orange ice cream. All right, so we see from Mark Rabin, says, this one is a real issue for me. I have a lane with lots of clips. I want to make it one clip, glue it, bounce it, how to best combine the whole lane so I can get fade handles after. Okay, so let's say, I'm not sure if, so let's say if we have bunch of lanes here, so we'll just take our lead vocal. So let's say if I move this to a different lane and we now have our items on lanes. Okay. So if we've kind of built up a comp with these, so let's come over here. Okay, let me just change one preference for me. Okay, so let's say we have these parts here. Now, if you want to, so let's say we have a bunch of clips. What I like to do personally, and I wanted to be able to kind of treat this as one single entity, I like to just go to the track versions. I like to duplicate the version. And now, you know, if we glued all of the events together here, so if I come over here, a lot of people think, okay, I'm just going to glue these events to turn them into one event. So right now I could see my fade handles, my clip gain can be adjusted here. You know, we could resize all the events. So if I come over here, a lot of people think, okay, we're going to glue the events together. And when we glue events together, that creates a part. Now, when we do this, you may notice that your fade handles are gone. If you just simply double click, your fade handles are still here. So you just do it in what's called the part editor as opposed to the sample editor. So if I wanted to come over here and adjust the clip gain of these, I can just come right over here, you know, take these different parts and all of my clip gain handling will be identical. So if you do glue, that's fine. Just realize that you can come over here and just double click to do all the little fade handles in the part editor. So since I've come over here, we have all these different clips. And if I wanted to join them all together, I could select the events. And then if I go to bounce selection, I could do that. But remember that since I duplicated the particular track version, what I could do is now I go to version 1, I could still have all of the parts, and when I go to this particular version, this is all of those parts that I selected kind of, you know, bounced together. So, you know, you could treat just kind of the, you know, the particular events here, you know, so I could always go back and tweak the original data, or I could say this is going to be my version where everything is kind of consolidated. So if you're doing like a lot of vocal, edits, and you're like, oh, this one word is annoying, you could just go back to this level and say, okay, I just need to do a little bit of a fade out on this one clip, and then, just simply duplicate again, and you could come right over here and rebounce the selection. So this way you always have kind of like all of the components, and then in a different track version, you could have kind of all of the edits comped together. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Mark. All right, so we see Flyvy just says, I actually moved my microphone and backdrop so I can record from my PC chair. The problem was reading lyrics. Yeah. All right, so we have Emmanuel Morin just saying hi from Quebec. So glad you can make it. All right, and Michael Teams is granted Millard Brown 1 gallon of raspberry swirl ice cream. So Millard Brown just mentioning about the colors from within the mixer. So let me just try. Okay, so if we're in the mixer, all right, so if I want to come over here, shift, so let's say I'll do these. All right, so to multiply color, just hold down the shift key. All right, let me see if we enable. All right, so let's see if now that we have these selected in mixer, if we could just, yeah, so you could also just multiply color like this in the mix console. So even if this is the active, so and then that will reflect. Thanks for that reminder, Millard. All right, Soren has received 1 gallon of Moose Tracks ice cream. All right, so we see from Dunk's Always Music, just says, not the control room, every track reduces in volume. So is it reducing in volume on playback, or do you actually see like the faders move? So, or do you see like a clip gain change, like where the waveform gets shorter in amplitude, has less amplitude? Michael Teams is on fire with ice cream today. He's given Flyvy 1 gallon of cherry vanilla ice cream. All right. So Jose Spirit says MediaBay is slow and buggy. So let's say if I open up my MediaBay here, so we'll just quickly open it up. So, and I have, probably 50,000 audio files or so on my system. So let me know what you think is buggy about it. But if I wanted to come over here and say, okay, I'm looking for bass, and I'm looking in a particular folder, we could search for all of your different media types. So, as we want to look in folders for particular items. So let's say, okay, I'm looking for anything that has the word VK in it, and then, we could automatically search for all the files in this folder, or on the VST sound, or in my computer. So now here's everything that has a VK in it, and I could just choose for this to only be audio files if we want. So anything that has VK as metadata will automatically be included. So let me know, like what you find buggy about it. And so if you have a specific thing, I'd love to hear it. So see if we could help you with that. Right, Rick France asks, hi Greg, is there any way to horizontally scroll the timeline using shortcut keys without the mouse and without moving the playhead cursor? Okay, so I think let's come over here. So we want to just make sure I understand. A way to horizontally scroll the timeline with shortcut keys. All right, you don't want to move. All right, so let's see if we. All right, so I'm just using my cursor position. All right, so let's say I'm going to place my cursor at measure 3, roughly right there. So I think that's moving. I'm just holding down the command and the left and right arrows, and that's kind of nudging the cursor. So you just basically want to move this here. All right, but you don't want to use the mouse, and it has to be a keyboard shortcut. So without moving the playhead. Okay, so. All right, see if we can find, maybe we'll look in the key command. So I can try my CC121 real quick and see if I put it in jog. Okay, that's going to move the playhead position. Let's look maybe under transport or navigate. All right, let me just see if I. All right, so that moves the playhead position. And we could obviously just kind of come over here. You don't want to use the scroll wheel. So we want to just get my So you want this function where we just hold down the shift key with the mouse scroll wheel, but you don't want to use the mouse. All right, let me just try. All right, and you could also just kind of, if you push the mouse down, you push the mouse button down, we could just navigate that way, but you don't want to use the mouse. Let me just make sure. All right, let me just see if there's anything in the transport menus and key commands. All right, let me see if we just do the nudge one bar. So let's see if this moves to. It's going to move the playhead on the nudge. There's probably a way to do it. Let's take a look, see if there's any. Yeah, I don't know of a way. I'm not seeing. I mean, we could move without moving. So let me know if you wanted to do from controller, because I mean, obviously you could just kind of come over here and just hold down the shift key with the mouse scroll wheel. If you wanted to do that. But that's using the mouse. But let me know, if you didn't know that, if that is acceptable. I could play around with it over the weekend and see if I come up with anything else. But I think that's like such an easy thing to do with the mouse scroll wheels. Just hold down a shift key and navigate left and right, and that doesn't affect the play position. So we can see where our play cursor is here, but that would allow us to navigate. Or if you just hold down we could navigate vertically and horizontally. When you hold down the mouse button or the mouse scroll wheel, and then you can move around as well. So let me know if you just want to drive it from a controller, but I think most people have access to the mouse to be able to navigate pretty easily and conveniently. Jazzy, it's reminding everyone that there's the 25th anniversary Nuendo sale, so it's 50% off on Nuendo. All right, we see Tim K joining from Zeist in the Netherlands. Thanks for joining. Wonderful to have you on. All right, Mark Raven's impressing us with his binary code knowledge. All right, so Yazian Trabi Music says I don't have loops and samples in Cubase 15 projects in the cloud, so everyone can work together. So Cubase 15 isn't out, but if you wanted to be able to work projects in the cloud so everyone can work together, Steinberg had that as a service called VST Transit, and it was really underutilized, so they spent a lot of money for the servers to be able to do that, and very few people did that, so it was discontinued. So it was an incredibly low percentage of people actually wanted to collaborate in the cloud, but we had it for about 5 years, and people just didn't use it. All right, Val's just saying, why do I have the feeling that I've waited 15 years for Mix Key by Steinberg? So downloading it right now. So yeah, definitely check it out. All right, Michael Teams has granted me 1 gallon of Kahlua mocha ice cream for my family and myself. Sounds good. All right, Bratman Studios just mentioning something I've noticed when using external synths back into the mixer through Cubase. The volume slider may not control the volume. It will control the effects on the channel and play MIDI, but no volume. So, you should be able to, so if we add an instrument track, so if it's kind of configured and we come over, so let's say we're going to add our instrument track, we want it to be our external, so let's say for our 2600. Now there's also the return gain right here that you could adjust, but I believe that once that track is created that you could just simply, use this volume right here to control that. But there's also, like, as soon as you add the particular plugin, there's return gain here that you could use as well, but you should be able to control it right from there. All right, Val's received 1 gallon of cinnamon crunch ice cream. Michael Teams is inspired with ice cream flavors today. All right, Vince is just asking a question. When I start Cubase, I get a pop-up saying resolve missing files every time. How do I stop this from happening? Do I just delete them one by one? So you could go to the media menu. And you could say remove unused media, and then just simply save the project, and then it shouldn't reference those particular files. So once again, try going to media menu, remove unused files, and once you resave the project, then I think that message should stop. All right. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped. Let me just find my spot. Okay, so I think I'm close. All right, so Robert Gentry just says, thanks, that was very helpful about the drum comp. Yeah, let me know if that works for you. took me a while to figure it out too. All right. See Rick, Bratman Studios, is relaxing after that long trip from Maui. You guys send some Greg some photos, and don't think he's on Facebook. Yeah, I'm on Facebook, so you can find me there. All right. Yeah, look forward to seeing your photos. Love seeing photos of Maui. All right, so we see Val just saying, OMG, I love mix key. This is so great, finally. Thanks. All right, Richard Willis asks, can you bounce the comp into a new dedicated track without all the takes? So essentially, it's one take. So yeah. So if you're doing it on like a single event, so let's say if we come over here, and principle would apply for multi-track as well. So if you're here, so let's say we've done our comp. So we have our lanes here, and let's say this is our luxurious, beautiful comp. So if I wanted to just come over here, one of the things, and you could make a macro to do this. Like if you wanted to just say, okay, we want to go to edit, and we will say render in place. So we'll do it as one event. And now we could have, this is our comp. All the original tracks are muted, and we could just come right over here, and this is our rendered bass file. If we didn't want to do that, we could also, and I may have a macro for this. Let's see if I still have it. All right, so let me just come over here. Let's make it. So let's just make a macro in the key command area. Okay, so we'll say bounce to new track version. Okay, so what I want to do is select all events on track. Okay, and then we want to duplicate version. And then bounce selection. All right, so now when we run this macro, if I did it right, so we have everything kind of comped together here. So what I want to do now is just come over here. Let's run this macro. This is 3 steps, and see if that. All right, let me try switching the order of this. Okay, so I have this. So now with this order, what we've done, so we did track versions, duplicate version, then we're going to select all on tracks, and then we're going to bounce selection. So this way I don't have to like change any routing for processing or EQs or plugins. And we go back, so we have our original comped version here. And then when we run that macro, it'll just make a automatic new track version with the file bounced. So to do that macro, again, we would come over to your key commands and bounce to new track version. So track versions, we want to duplicate the version, edit, we're going to select all of the events on that, and then we're going to bounce selection. And you can see, so I will delete this version. So, we have all these different comps here, and then I could just, again, just boom, and it's done just that easily. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we have Recyclop checking in from Finland. Great to see you on. All right, so we see how does Cubase internally manage floating point summing across multiple buses? So it's just kind of, all handled, with floating point precision, so you don't have to do anything particular with that. So it's just, all the summing is internally handled all the time. Any delay compensation is also automatically handled even when using external effects processor. And the second part to the question, what practical difference does 32-bit float versus 64-bit float make in a large mix session? So most of I think all of the Steinberg plugins are 64-bit float capable. So when we go to, not that window, but we go to your studio menu to your VST plugin manager, here we could actually see if a particular plugin is, so we could say show the plugins that support 64-bit processing. So let me just open that up again. So when we're doing 64-bit processing, so, pretty much all of the internal Steinberg tools will be set up for that. But you could just simply see, again, which particular plugins are set up for that. And again, go to... Now, the main reason that we did 64-bit floating point is because we released audio interfaces that Yamaha designed, that were Steinberg branded. So when you come over here, let's just go to, so if we want to, again, just say, let's go to my VST effects. This is where it makes a big difference. Then we could show our particular, it's looking for, so then it could show you the which plugins are 64-bit. So we can show all plugins, so we can see all the Steinberg ones. So when we release 32-bit audio hardware, you always want the actual processing precision. And there's confusion on this between it's 32-bit, what does that mean? So there's 32-bit and 64-bit memory addressing. So, just about everything is 64-bit, so that means we could do more than 8 gigs of RAM. And there's 32-bit and 64-bit processing precision. So when we record in at 24-bit audio, and we wanted to add cumulative things like effects and EQs and automation, if we were to be in a 24-bit fixed point system, which a lot of early digital audio workstations were, and you record at 24-bit, you're already kind of at the maximum resolution. So with that, we could utilize 32-bit floating point precision so that we could have our 24-bit audio file and still have extra space for all the processing of built-in effects like reverbs and EQs, compressors. So we need that extra information so that we don't have to truncate the original audio quality to incorporate that extra information. So when we do 32-bit integer audio, such as like the Yamaha or the Steinberg URC and the AXR4 units, at that point, it's recording not a 24-bit word length audio file, it's recording a 32-bit word length audio. So if we did 32-bit floating point, if we recorded audio at 32-bit integer, then if we're processing at 32-bit floating point, we would be losing, information from the original source material to add new information like plugins and automation to it. So then we go to 64-bit float. So when you use 32-bit. Now, when we first came out with it, and I've told this story in the live streams before, I did just a quick demo song, and I rendered one as with 32-bit floating point precision, and one is 64-bit floating point precision. I sent it to my friend Greg Lukens, who's kind of a world-renowned golden ear guy. He's a blind mastering engineer, good friend of mine. I've known him 25 years. And and I sent him to 2 files, and he has like Meyer X10s, so I think they're $85,000 each in his mastering room. And I just sent him to 2 files, and I just labeled them like A and B. And I was like, Greg, tell me what you hear. And then, because I wanted to see if it made a difference. And he's like, this file sounds better. I'm not sure why, but this one's definitely better sounding. And without a doubt. And he chose a 64-bit floating point precision. Now, what's interesting, sometimes people think, it takes more processing power to do the 64-bit floating point precision. But actually, since everything in Cubase, the audio engine, is set up for 64-bit floating point, it's when we have to kind of, on plugins that don't have 64-bit floating point process, we have to kind of downgrade the precision to 32-bit float and then go up to 64-bit. That when we use 32-bit floating point precision for the plugins that require it, that conversion stage can actually add more kind of audio performance usage than just doing everything at 64-bit floating point. So it's kind of the long story on the differences between the two. But if you're recording at 32-bit floating point, and if you're using a lot of, if you're using a lot of plugins that have 64-bit, it may give you the edge. You may not hear it in a really down and dirty hip hop track, but something really, pristinely clean recorded, like maybe a classical or, an Americana, Alison Krauss type of project. You could probably hear the difference. But you may have to have really good ears, but it does make a difference. Okay. All right. So we see Anurag Sharma says, can we copy sends from a single bus to multiple buses? All right. So let's say we have, just create a new audio project here. All right, and let's say we have a send going to an effect here. So add effect track. So say we'll go to our studio delay. So generally with sends, you don't have to copy as much. So let's say we come over here, we'll go to our sends. So all we would have to do, since we're sending it, we could take all these tracks and send it to the same effects unit. So when we take this track, this is using this fader to automatically send that source to this effects channel track. So I don't have to copy it, but all you'd have to do is on the other tracks, I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option plus the Shift key. And we can say, let's send it to the studio delay. And I want to turn it on, and we could adjust the values. So now all of these tracks that we don't have to copy, we could just simply enable the same send. So now all of these tracks are going to that particular send effect. So, or group, whatever you need it to do. So you could just route to the same destination. So it's unlike an insert effect where it's going to be dedicated for a particular channel. Then we could hold down the Alt or Option key to copy. So if I wanted to come here, let's say, okay, we have a black valve compressor on this channel. And if I want it, so if we say, okay, I want to, copy. So if we just come over here, so I think if we just go to our sends, then we could copy. And if we want to, I think if we just come over here, we could, so here we could paste, 2 tracks. But with the sends, you don't have to paste it. You could just simply turn it on and set it to send to the same destination. All right, so we see Fly-V just asking, how do I split song parts and set them to play in a certain edited path using markers? Okay, so okay, so I'm not sure if you want to, let me just jump back over here to this project. So I'm not sure if you want to play them. I'll show you kind of 2 different techniques. So one of the things that we could do is to have a, so let's say we want to come over, so we're listening to our project here. Let me just check my audio interface again. Sorry. Okay, so as we play this project, okay, so we could add what's called an arranger track. So I'm going to add track, right click, add track, arranger. So I'm just going to come over here and say, okay, we want this as, and I'll just make this larger so we can see it. So,
do you recall?
And I'll just kind of get that timing of that event right. So I'll just come over here. So it's okay, we have this.
Do you? It was 7th grade in the school parking lot, waiting on our yellow coach to ferry us home.
All right, so let's say we want to come here, and then we wanted this section to play. Let's just listen to it.
Look my way and you're hot. Well, even now I'm so in love with you, just like a long, long time ago.
All right, so let's say this will be like verse, chorus, and we'll do another kind of verse.
Our first kiss, there was no regret, right after that Garth Brooks show.
All right, so let's say, okay, this will be verse 2, and we want, let's say, chorus 2 here. All right, so we could kind of define our different parts of our song if we hold down the Alt or Option key, we could double click here and name it. So say, okay, verse 1. Chorus 1. Verse 2. Chorus 2. All right, so now we could just kind of come over here and we could change kind of the order of how these are played. So, or if I wanted this to play twice, so we could kind of pick our songs and pick different sections of our songs. That's how you could split it into different parts if you wanted to. So I'm not sure what you mean by play in a certain edited path using the markers, but let's say I want to come here and I just want to take that section and we'll say, okay, I want it to do A, and then I'll just do like a little section here, followed by B. So once we turn on the arranger track, we can now come over, hit play.
We first met, that was a long
Instead of playing linearly,
love with you, just like a long time ago. You recall the day we first met, that was a long
so this way we could play kind of non-linearly. So let me know if that's kind of what you're looking to do. If that makes sense for you, Vince. All right. Louis Palomino asks, hi, Greg. How can I create separation between mixer channels to have better visualization of zones? Okay, so let's say here I want to have like a couple of effects tracks. I'm going to come over here and let's say I'll hide my input channels. All right, so when we go to our visibility settings, and then so on the top tab, we could have visibility, and then we could have zones. So I could say, okay, I want my guitar, let's say I always want my lead vocal anchored to the left-hand side. I want guitar and lead vocal anchored, and I want my other elements to be set up into the right-hand side, let's say for my effects. So I'm going to come over here, let's say my effects and my outputs. So we see these 3 dots here. So this will be anchored to the left-hand side. The middle will be anchored in the middle, and then we could have like our effects and our outputs anchored to the right. Now if I come here in the middle and let's say I want to add 24 tracks. So now when we go to the mixer, once we're in the middle zone, we could just navigate, and here we navigate between all 24 tracks, and we see that when we do this, we're not navigating in kind of the the outputs or the inputs, so that we could scroll within each section as needed as well. So again, from the inspector, we want to choose the visibility in the upper zone, and then choose zones, and then you could see the 3 different dots that you could allocate around. So let me know if that's what you want to do. All right. Interesting to know that Jazz Dude is a level 42 fan. So I believe Jazz Dude is a bassist. So good reason for that. All right, Bratman Studio, Rick asks, hey Greg, I noticed you can have many songs open, then activated, new song, and activated. Is it holding all that info in a RAM or just a shell of the previous song? How many can be open? So there's no real limit on how many projects can be open. One project can be active at a time. So once that project is active, then you can copy. Once you activate a project, all the other projects are unloaded and the memory is free, and the memory is now allocated entirely to the new project, and the others are just kind of in the background. And when it's activated, the currently active project will be unloaded from processing and memory, and the new project will load up for whatever processing and memory needs it has to. But one of the great things with that is, you can say, oh, I really like, these 2 tracks of audio. Even though it's a different project entirely, I could come over here and copy audio from one project to another project, even if it's inactive. So if it's inactive, I could copy from that to an active project, or from an active project to an inactive project. So you could still kind of access and be able to have all of your different functions available for you there. So you can extract parts from inactive parts to active, but it's only going to take the memory and audio processing of the active project. All right. Everyone's happy with their ice cream choices today from Michael Teams. All right, Roland Stuff says, thanks for the helpful steer on using Create Harmony voices, Greg. You're welcome. All right, Susie Mark Rabin says, Greg, I only use the term lanes because I wanted to be clear that we were in the project window. Okay, sorry for misunderstanding. All right, so we see Mega Fam Gaming says mix key, how to get it. So if you just go to, let's say, the Steinberg website, and click on mix key, and then you could download for free and play it out. So now if you wanted to send your Cubase audio, so let's say if I open up mix key now, I could take the audio of Cubase. So we'll just come over here. Let's say we can now take the audio from Cubase, open that as a source, and then when we go into like your streaming software, you would just then see a driver for mix key streaming, and then that way you could take the audio from Cubase, the audio from Wavelab, and audio from your voice, and then send that out to TikTok or other streaming software like OBS. But yeah, so just go to the website, download it, check it out, play around with it. It's pretty slick. Okay. Okay, just reading through. Mark Rabin says, I like that so much. That was beyond helpful. So, all right. So Val is Asking, was Y42, can phase coherence be maintained when routing multi-mic drum recordings through multiple group channels with parallel effects? So everything is sample accurate, and kind of the sample precision is going to be a much higher resolution than phase. So yes, no problem with that. Okay, Mark Rabin asks, okay, maybe a better way of asking the previous question. When I have lots of clips in one project, window track, and I want to make one track, I used to be able to bounce and get a full track result. All right, just make sure I'm not missing any part of. Yeah, I'm just going to check my. Okay, so Mark's question again is, okay, maybe a better way of asking it says, when I have lots of clips on one project window track, I want to make one track, I used to be able to bounce and get a full track result. So I'm not sure if you're doing like multiple tracks, or is it all on one track? But let's say if I want to take like all of my background vocals here, so these are all background vocals, and I wanted to bounce them down to one track. If we go to our render in place, I'm just going to select, I may have to select just the tracks here. So say if I select the tracks, I can come over, let's get to render in place, let's get to render settings, and then you'll have the option here. I'll give it a name. But then you have the option when multiple tracks are selected to mix down to one audio file. So now when I render, it will take all of the background vocals and render them down to one single file. And you could do a render in place or bounce selection for multiple files if you wanted to, but you could now also just take the selected tracks and bounce those down. So it should be done here in a couple seconds. And so now as we do this, we'll just listen to the background.
Caught my breath while you called me to.
So that way you could just take, you know, just those particular tracks. And if you don't have, I think I had to reverb selected as well. That's why you heard the guitar. But then you can just simply bounce multiple tracks down to a single track. So let me know if that's what you want, Mark. Or if you just want to do a single track, you know, it's just, you can just right click here, say select all events, and you could just choose to bounce selection, and that wouldn't combine different tracks together. That would do a single track at a time. All right, if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button. All right. Okay, so we can see from Val, who asked, question, is it possible to change a project logical editor script to dynamically rename tracks based on folder hierarchy or the track color? Okay, so let's say I want to, I'll just, in this example, let's say all of our names. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do this. Okay, so let's open up a project logical editor. So let's do first rename tracks based on a folder hierarchy. All right, so let's say I want to take all of my, I have a folder here of my background vocals. Okay, so we'll just call this background vocals. Okay, and we want to change the color of all events in the okay, so let's go to the project logical. So we want to, anything that's in this particular folder, we want to change the color of, or change the color to a particular color. Okay, so let's get to the project logical editor setup. Let's remove. Okay, so we want to say I think we would maybe just choose our container type is folder track. And let's say name contains, let's say vocals. And then I think we want to choose to say our property is set to parent object is selected. So let me see if I choose this as select. All right, let me see if I remove that. All right. The same media type is your container type. Let's see if we can do by track. All right, let me just try a different approach. So we want to basically say anything that's in that particular folder. So we want it to name, we'll say contains vocals. Okay, so we do this, we have this track selected. All right, so we have that, and now let's choose a property. Yeah, there's a little trick just to get the to select the tracks within the folder. So let's see if we okay, so let's say our all right, so we want to select the folder, let's say our container type is going to be a folder track. Okay, so now we come here, we select our folder track. I'll say media type is audio and property set to parent object is selected. sorry for having brain cramp on this. Let me. All right, so we're going to select. All right, let's try just media type is equal to audio. Okay, so now we select all of our audio and we want to say so the trick is just to get those selected. I know I've done it before, but let's just see if we do. All right, let me just. All right, so let's see if we come over here, we could say, okay, we want to media type. So let's say if I have that selected, okay, so now, so if we have that selected there, all right, so now we've selected all of the tracks within the selected folder. And what we want to do now is rename the tracks. So I'm going to choose to transform. And here we're going to set color to a fixed value, and I want these all to be green. So if I take this, again, if these tracks are within the selected folder, we can make them our particular color here. So if I want those all to be orange, all right, so we can say, I'll just save this as a preset. So we'll say CCLS tracks in folder turn orange. Okay, so let's say we want to, so if that is selected, we can just, again, come over here and change those particular colors. Now, if we wanted to select one that's named, so I would come over here, let's just do a new preset. All right, and if we want to, if it's not where it's always going to be selected, we could say now I want to select a folder named orange. So we'll say let's select or a folder track. So we'll say our container type is a folder track and contains, we'll go to name and we'll say contains vocals. All right, so now if I'm here, we could say, all right, so we're going to save this as a preset. So okay, so now I want to come back over, let's look for orange. Okay, and the first thing I would do as a pre-step, as a pre-comment command, is we'll say we want to do under we'll say select folder with vocals in name. So now if I have this kind of broken up, we're going to use this project logical editor preset to select a folder that has vocals and then color it orange. So let's say if I come here, let's change the color on all these events and see if we get this to work. So let's say they're all kind of green. All right, so now if we run this project logical editor, yeah, so that would do it based on the name of the folder. All right, now the second part, sorry, it took me a while to get there, from Val is, so if you want to rename the tracks, all right, so let's say so we could set the color. Now let's say if we want to rename the tracks, so we could say we want to prepend, and we'll say the word Vox _. Okay, so now we could take all of these events that are in that particular folder, and we'll say, so with those conditions, we can now rename the tracks that are based in that folder by prepending the word Vox _. So now if we wanted to select tracks, so let's say we want to script to dynamically rename tracks based on the color. So let's say I have these tracks are, we change the color. So let's say, all right, okay, so let's say I want to rename tracks that are this green color. So we'll say we want to take tracks, so media type is equal to audio, and we could also do or MIDI. Okay, and we'll say that their color, so I'm not sure if we could select based on color. So let's just come here. Okay, color. So let's say color equals. All right, I think it's this color or this color. All right, so let's say now we have this track selected. All right, let me just look at the inspector here for. Okay, so like these tracks are orange, sorry. All right, and let me just set the color. Okay, and so now we're going to select MIDI or audio tracks that are color 2, and and let's rename. So I'm going to choose this to transform, and we want to go to name, and we will prepend the name with Y42. So now, and I'll just make that into an underscore to separate it. You could also just add a space. So now any track that is orange will be prepended with Y42. So again, we want to take audio or MIDI tracks, and the color is equal to this color. And again, you could just kind of open your color wheel up and then rename based on that. Sorry it took me a while to get there, but let me know if that's helpful for you, Val. I'll just leave that open in case you want to look at it while I read through the next question. All right. MegaFam Gaming says I want that mix key ASAP, so you can just go to Steinberg and just go for it. All right. Let's see. Mark Rabin and Millard Brown saying hi to Tim. All right. Mark Rabin wants all Earthlings to hit the like button. Okay, so MegaFam Gaming says also, guys, fix that tempo thing when you add beat from desktop, like Cubase 5. I still love Cubase 5. So let me know like which particular tempo thing you're talking about. So if it's like a tap tempo, you know, it's just right, it's going to be just directly on the transport bar. So you just come, you know, right over here and you could just kind of click on your tap tempo. You could also just record tempo as MIDI data. So if you wanted to, you know, record, you know, let's say if you had a bunch of MIDI notes that were laid out for you, you know, we could select that particular file here, go to MIDI, and under functions, there's a calculate tempo for MIDI events where you could make it say, okay, these are eighth notes or quarter notes, and that could automatically do tempo calculation for you. But if you could let me know what you see, what you want in Cubase 5, we could probably help you with that. All right. Let me just adjust the size of my browser here. Yeah. So I can read it a little easier. Okay. All right, so I have Oswald Bangalter saying hello from Mexico City. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're well. All right. All right, so we see about mixed keys. It better to be this, my last output, my whole laptop system, like run Cubase out into it, or better have Cubase last output to be my headphones when connected. So I would say that unless you were collecting different sources, you know, as kind of like in a software mixer for a live stream, that's when I would use mix key. If I was just running Cubase, I would just run the audio straight through Cubase. It's when you want to maybe have Cubase going and have audio when you go to a YouTube channel and you're streaming, you know, this will combine all those different sources together for you. All right, Chris Higginson just says, hi, Greg. Any chance you could do a quick run through of that audio warp functions in Cubase 14? Okay, so most of the time when we get this question, it's going to be more about like free warping, but let's go ahead and take a look at it. We just may have an audio file that's kind of well set up for it. Let me. I think if memory serves, this might be the file I was thinking of. Let me see. Here, I'll just make one real quick here. Okay, so I'm going to add an instrument track here quickly. Okay, so I want to just roughly get some audio in, and I want to be able to fix it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to add an audio track. We're going to set the instrument as our input. All right, let me just go to just take the delay off. Okay. So I want to basically, I'll just try to record roughly to a click track here. Okay, so let's say we want to do some warping on this audio material. All right, so one of the things that we could do with warping, if we want this to be, so I'm going to come over, let's double click on the event here, and we're going to say, we'll go to our hit points. So a couple of ways of doing this. One is to just come over here, let's edit the hit points, so we could have these hit points at our rhythmically significant areas, and we could create warp markers. I could also go to my audio, to real-time processing, and create warp markers from hit points. All right, so now when I switch to my free warp tool, all right, we could come over here, and if we wanted to get rid of a marker, or like a warp marker, hold down the Alt or Option key, and you could just click. So let's say I want this particular snare hit to be on 2. Now we could also add warp markers by clicking. So, but it's sometimes faster just to add the warp markers. So if we want it to, get to the point where we move an event, like I wanted this to be right on beat 2, I would now come over here once we have our warp tool, and then we could switch to mode. There's 3 different modes. We could go to free warp, and now when we grab that tool, we can automatically move that event in time. So we can say, okay, I want that to go right there. Now I'm going to choose, let's say, for this to go into like quarter notes, and we could enable snap, and as we do this, we can just have this particular thing kind of snap right to the grid. So at this point, we can say, oh, this note was a little bit late. I just kind of moved the free warp tool when it turned just to the right, when that warp marker turns white. Now move it, and then that could automatically, again, snap directly to our grid. So if we want to, we could just say use quantize, and now we could have this automatically. We can see that just kind of like almost like falling into a rut. It'll just kind of snap right into place there. So if you say, okay, I want this to fall right on beat 3, hover over it, it turns white, and then you could just move that and have that snap in place. So even if we say use quantize, and I want this to be quarter note triplets instead, I can just come over here, we'll say let's do quarter note triplets, and now it'll just snap in triplets. So once you have kind of the hit points, and hit points are automatically calculated, you can adjust the hit points in the hit point editor, the samples, and then you'll see the little create, and then create warp markers, and or do the same thing by going into your audio to real-time processing to create warp markers from hit points. Those warp markers won't be visible until you're at the free warp tool is activated. And sometimes at a certain zoom level, like we don't want the entire piece to be obscured with just yellow vertical lines. So you may have to be at a certain zoom level for those warp markers to be visible. And then once they're visible, you could enable snap, and it will snap to your grid choices so that we can just automatically move your points to kind of fix rhythmic anomalies in your recording. Okay. All right. All right, so we see from Rick France, it says, thanks, Greg. The reason I was looking for the key command scroll so I didn't have to use two hands, mouse, and shift to do the same functionality. I'll see if I can work around using keyboard Maestro. I know some controllers automatically do it. I know like the Nuage controller would do that. So. All right. So we see Morkstar just asks, hey, what are you up to? Is this a vocal recording session? So it's just a live stream where we answer questions on Cubase and Steinberg products for people. We see Vouch says, finally, the perfect loopback tools, especially for people that don't have audio interfaces with loopback. It's great. And Yassian just says he loves mixed key. Thanks, Steinberg. So that's great. All right, sorry, my chat field. All right, sorry, just knocked over glass. All right, on my desk. All right. All right, so we have Loonrick says, hi, Greg. How can I separate instruments in this step lane of my percussion track by track? Okay, step. How can I separate the instruments in the step lane of my percussion track by track? All right. So let's say, I'm not sure if it's, let's say if we add a drum track, and I'm not sure if it's a drum track that you're talking about, but I'll do drum track. It'll get us to the same spot. All right, so I'm going to add a drum track here. Okay, let's load up a quick preset. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go to editor, program a quick beat. All right, so. So let's just say. All right, so let's say if we started here, what we could do is just simply drag the pattern here. So we say, okay, let's just drag this pattern onto our project window. Okay, so let's say we have our pattern here. We will duplicate it a couple times. Okay, so we have this pattern here. All right, so I want to take this pattern, and if I wanted all of these drums on their own separate tracks, I would come right over here. I would convert these to MIDI. So you click in a little drop-down menu, convert pattern events to MIDI parts. Then all you have to do is go to the MIDI menu, and we'll see dissolve part, and we'll choose to separate pitches. So once I process this, we'll now have kind of our different pitches automatically broken down for us. So any MIDI drums, you could just select the event, come over here, go to MIDI, go to dissolve part, and separate pitches, and boom. Now each pitch is on its own track. So let me know if that's what you wanted to do. All right, Weighted Metal Recordings just says great question and tip. Wish I knew which one it was. It was about an hour ago. All right, have to catch up. All right. Flyvy says maybe I need some coffee too. All right. And Michael Radar, the band, has made coffee. You can't say that on a live stream. I have like an hour and 51 minutes to go. Not fair. All right. All right, so we have Baza saying hello from Greenwich in London. Thanks for joining us today. Hope to see you on many more live streams. All right, we see Pablo is saying hello remotely. He's on the road, being the busiest drummer in Spain. All right, Michael Teams says happy retirement day for our friend and keyboardist Jeff, another Cubase user. Wish him a happy retirement for us on the from the live stream. All right, Richard Wells says, yep, really need to use the macro function more. I'm just too scared. So you're not really going to set off a nuclear bomb or, break a leg or anything like that. So experiment with macros, just create kind of a project with this scenario and just kind of practice macros. I look at it, some people do jigsaw puzzles. Like to me, a jigsaw puzzle is coming up with a macro or a project logical editor, or a project logical editor that triggers a macro and another project logical editor within a project logical editor preset. So stuff like that. So just it's a nice little intellectual challenge. Keep your neuroplasticity going. All right, so we see from Richard Wells says, thanks, Greg, for all your help and knowledge. I've had a bad mental health day, so I'm off to bed to listen to some classical music. Jazz Dudes Lists is recommending listening to Smetana, so that's a good piece. I always loved Scenes from the Moldau, so one of my favorite pieces. All right, Roland Stuff says, hi Greg, is there a way of continually changing frequencies EQ parameters for a single track, maybe using a control lane in the same way as an external controller would be used or something? Yeah, so let's take a look. So let's say if we have this going on, and let's say on this track, I want to open up like frequency EQ. And what we could do is just simply use, let's go to the modulator. So I'll come over here and say, okay, I want the frequency EQ. I'm going to just come right over here. And we'll take band 4. I'm going to narrow the Q a little bit. And what I want to do is I'm going to click right here. And let's just adjust the frequency. And we could say, okay, I want this to be like maybe whole notes. And we could say, okay, I want it to start later or to go. So we could, and then we could also so this is kind of a great use of what the modulators are for, so that you don't have to draw in the automation to do that. You could just say, okay, I want to do this shape, and there's many different types. If you want to do like step sequencer or envelope follow, you could do rammer, randomizing in the mod scripter, or different shapes, so you could, as that's playing, and we could rhythmically sync this if you want that to be like every 16 bars for it to change slightly, or every 4 bars. So as we play, it'll just kind of slightly go, but still in sync. So now it's going to start its 4 bars. So yeah, play around with the modulators, and I think that would it's a great way to kind of add a little bit of interest in tracks when you have things kind of slightly adjusting parameters, so it's not always so static. So modulators are great for that. Okay. Okay, so we see from Loenrick, says a percussion track event is opened as a key editor piano. The step lane editor is no longer accessible, right? So what you can do, and again, this is like very similar to what we were doing before, is I'm going to come right over here. So we have our step lanes, right? So let's say I want to be able to edit the step and edit in the piano roll editor. So I'm going to come over here. Let's duplicate the version. And on our duplicate version, we will just come over. So we already had that converted. So let's say, okay, I'm going to come over here. Let's duplicate the version. All right, so we have version 1 is like our patterns. Version 2, I'm going to select these and convert them to MIDI events. So now I could go directly back to the pattern editor and go and just simply come right over here to my MIDI. So if I need it, if I wanted to edit in the MIDI key editor or the drum editor, we could do that. And if we want to go back to the pattern-based editor, it's just one mouse click away. So you could just simply duplicate that track version, and that way you have multiple kind of generations of parts on the same track without having to duplicate and, messing up kind of like, everything in your mix. All that stuff can be done very easily. Okay. All right, wonderful to see Gareth on from Bilbao, Spain. All right, we have Roland Klein joining from Kalmar, Sweden. Thanks for being online with us and joining the live stream today. All right, so Flyvy just says a Ranger track. That's the part I forgot. Thanks, Greg. All right, Pertti Kominen is joining, saying hello from Finland. All right, see Randy from Radar the Band saying hello, hey to Roland. All right. So we see, Greg, the pattern-based step lane on the drum track is great. Why not integrate the pattern option into the instrument track as well? On the instrument track today, if I modify any note, I have to make sure to update every event in the entire project. All right, so let's say if I wanted to come over here, let's open up, let's add an instrument track. Let's come over here, let's do a Halion Sonic. We're going to make this into a pattern event. All right. All right, so let's open up just like a kind of a Wurlitzer piano. Okay, so I'm going to go to my editor here. So let's just, I'll just kind of create part, and I'm just going to add some notes here. All right, so let's say I want to do maybe like a pentatonic scale, so say C, E, or C, D, E. Do a major pentatonic. So we'll do G. We could just add these chromatically, but this might be. You could also just do some other things. All right, so let's say. Okay, so wouldn't it be cool if we could now just kind of come over here and all right, so now when we play, all right, so let's say if I want to, come over here, we could just, very easily, just say, okay, we have that part. All right, so if I want to take a MIDI part in, we could do this. So, but, so now this, if we update that pattern, it's going to be updated. But I'll show you another trick. So let's say we convert this to MIDI. I'm going to select this particular event, and I'm going to hit Control or Command plus the letter K. And then we have this concept of shared copies. So let's say, okay, I want to do 7 shared copies. Okay, and when we see in the upper right-hand corner, so now that these are shared copies, so again, just come over, select the event, Control or Command plus the letter K. So say shared copies. All right, and when you see a shared copy, it has this little, almost like an equal sign. All right, so now if we notice that when I make an edit in one of these, I'll just okay, so, and I'll just move this up so we can see it a little easier. Okay, so now that I have a shared copy, I could just come over here, I could edit the original part. So I'm going to just delete some notes here. And we can see that those notes have all been deleted from the other parts. So if I want to copy these notes, I could duplicate the notes. I could select notes and move them up and down. So I could, and we can see that all of the other parts, as I move the notes up and down or left to right, that we could just simply, again, when we make a change in one, they're automatically applied to the other parts as well. All right. All right, Michael Teams wants people to smash the like button so I could be gainfully employed. And we have the great resource available weekly right in our homes. So Bratman Studio just says level 42 with the original drummer is a favorite of his for sure. All right, Robert Gentry just says, how do I clean up crossfade and bounce the comp easily after the group editing process? Okay, so let me see. I'll just come over. I'll just do a couple of tracks. I think this is related back to our like multi-track drum comp. So just do a couple of tracks here. Okay. Okay, so let's do a couple passes. Okay, so we have a couple passes here. I'm going to open up the lanes and all of them. All right, so let's say we've done our comp. Now I'll show you one trick that a lot of people miss. It's really a pretty powerful thing. So let me put on my group editing here. I'm going to put all these into folder and put them on group editing. Okay, so now let's say we have our comp here. All right, so we've done our comp across multiple tracks. Now, one of the things that you could do on each of the tracks is you'll see this little icon here that's for auto fade settings. So if you enable this, you could just have automatic fade in, fade outs, and crossfades, so that anytime that there's a transition, we don't see it visually, but what you could do is just simply at that point choose to have like just a playback fade in, fade out, or playback crossfade for events that are right next to each other. If we want to also come over here, so let's say we have our comp here, I think that we could also just let me just take my grid off here, and if I wanted to just select that, you could just do crossfades between the different sections, and you could zoom in depending on how tight you want the crossfades to be, so you can manually do crossfades if you need to edit them. But so that's what you could do if needed. But I would always, if you're doing like a multi-track comp, this could, a lot of times you don't necessarily have to edit the fade. You're just trying to get rid of the clicks and pops. And just turning on this feature for all of the tracks can prevent you from having to manually crossfade a lot of different things. So try to turn on the auto fades settings, and that should help. All right, so we see from Yazian, as possible to add in mix key recording desktop webcam soon. I think it's anything is possible, and obviously it's it's the very, very first generation that was released yesterday. I think our area of expertise is going to be, the audio, like getting multiple sources and cameras is pretty easy to do for a lot of like streaming platforms like OBS. Now getting the audio to all cooperate isn't. So, I think, if I were to anticipate, and I haven't had any discussions with anyone at Steinberg about this, but if I were to anticipate, I would say that it would be more audio centric because that's where our area of expertise is. All right. Okay, reading through comments. I'll try to clean up some of my logical editor presets and get them over to you this weekend. Jazz Dude, sorry. All right, so we see from Mega Fam Gaming says the Beats changed itself BPM. I want the original BPM. All right, so if you run into that scenario, so it could be like, so let's say if we have a loop and we want the loop to automatically play in time. So let's say, all right, so if I drag this over, all you'd have to do if you want it to play in the original tempo, when you audition files, if you have this little icon turned on, this would automatically enable musical mode for the event. So it's going to automatically kind of fit into, so you see right now that we have musical mode. So all you have to do if you want it to play the original time is just to go to select the event and come right over here and then just turn musical mode off. Then it's going to play back at the original tempo. But if we carry an audio file over, so we see this file, I turned off the musical mode preview, and when we dragged it in, it's not fitting to the grid. So, but if I take that same file and drag it in, we can have that snap to the grid, and we place that into musical mode, we see how that automatically fits. So just select the event and then just put it into musical, take it off of musical mode, and it will play back in the original tempo of the loop. All right, great to see Michael Pierce on from Grand Chapel Studios in England. Okay, reading through comments. And Michael Pierce received 1 gallon of chocolate haystacks ice cream. All right, so we see Logus Schwarin sees his modulator is a very iconic feature. Love it. Gareth saying I have freaky frequencies. All right, Chris Higginson's just wondering, are you or Steinberg going to release the Stream Deck template you've been working on? If you want to email me, I'd be happy to send it to you. And if you wanted to try it out, so you could email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, we have a question from Ted Springman. Says, "Hi Greg, Groove Agent 5 question. I assume drum sounds play their full length when performed on drum pads, but also from MIDI keyboard. But is there a way to make long samples stop on the release of a MIDI key?" Yeah. So let's go ahead. I'll just add a Groove Agent file here. So let's get a Groove Agent SE. All right, so if I take this, and let me just drag it to a pad here. Okay. So now we have our Groove Agent, and I play the key, I release it, and it's going to play the sample kind of all the way through to the end. So I just kind of touched it, and it's going to play. But if I want that to actually kind of follow and stop playing when I do, I think if we go to maybe the sample, and we could just say, so we go to the sample tab, so on the instrument, edit to the sample tab, and then we'll see here, play until release. So I'm going to hold the key down, release the key, it stops playing. So it's only going to play back as soon as I release the key. Whereas if we have a one-shot mode, which is default, it'll play all the way to the end of the sample. So again, go to Instrument, to Edit, to Sample, switch from one shot and select until release. Great to see you on, Ted, from Sherman Oaks, California. All right, so we have You Ain't from Chicago. It says, "Hi Greg, wondering about tools for the guitarists out there. Could you demo some amp and cab simulators to spice up some direct DI electric guitar parts in Cubase Pro 14? Let me see, I might have a whole amp rack demo project. Let me see, I haven't opened it up in a while. I don't think I've opened it on this computer, but let's take a look. Yeah, okay. So let's take a listen to some of the VST amp rack. Okay, so let's say, well, so we're listening to the inspiring dry guitar here, but we want kind of more of a bluesy. So, but if you want to change cabinets, and let's say, so you want maybe more of a bluesy lead, so direct. want it to be like for bass amps as well. And you can adjust your mic positions. And let's take a listen to. So direct, and out through the VST amp rack. All right, and again, go through some different cabinets. And if you want to add like some nice kind of rockabilly stuff, tremolo on. So you get an idea of, so if you haven't really played around with like the VST amp rack, it's, play around with it. There's lots of great sounds. I remember showing it to Beyonce's guitar tech once at my friend Kevin Walker's house, and he's like, that sounds like an amp, and he was just like, oh, I could just run my guitars through that and everything. Just my teardown time would be just seconds. So if you haven't played around the VST amp rack, check that out, and also check out the VST bass amp as well, equally good. All right, Michael Teams has granted Ted Springman 1 gallon of mint chocolate chip ice cream. All right, so we see Mark Rabin's going out to get some vitamin D before it snows on Monday. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you hopefully on Tuesday. All right. All right, just reading through. So we see from Jonathan Eggle, it says, I deleted all the preset ratings in Halion 7. Now when I play preset, it automatically gives it a 3-star rating. When I move to another preset, it says, I don't want it to automatically do this. Can I prevent it? So the default presets rating will be a 3-star until you change it. You could multiply select, like if you don't want any of the presets. So let's say if we come over to Halion instruments, so we'll come over to MediaBay. Like if you want it to all be 1 or 3, we could just say, okay, I want to come over to my VST sound, and let's say, okay, I want to go through my etude presets. I'm going to select all of my etude presets here, and then we could just get rid of ratings, or we could just give everything 0 ratings, or you could multiply change the ratings if you don't want to see any, or if you want it to be the default will be set to 3 if there is no rating, and then you could kind of tweak as necessary. So you say, oh, I like this sound, then you could just kind of choose accordingly. So if you select kind of like all your Halion sounds, you could change their ratings simultaneously if needed. So okay, so we have user from Taiwan, Cubase user in Taiwan, says, I want to know how I can wrap my audio or sample correctly and fast. Thank you very much. I'm going to assume it's maybe warp. So let's take a look. Let me just do another one. Our library, sorry. Okay, so if you wanted to warp like really fast, so let's say I want to take this particular file here, so let's say, and I wanted to quantize it. I could just come over here, let's get to the quantize menu. I could make sure that audio warp is turned on. And let's say, okay, I want it to be quantized to 16th notes. And then if you watch kind of the lines here, or if we say, okay, let's warp it to 8th notes instead. So when I do this, you'll see that the rhythmic positions 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So, and if we wanted to apply a swing afterwards, so you can kind of change the feel. Now, if once you have stuff that's warped, also, if you have the hit points as you record audio in, you drop it in a project, it's automatically going to do the hit point calculation. Go to audio, to hit points, or real-time processing rather, and we'll create the warp markers. And now when you want to do free warp. We could, as we zoom in, you'll see the yellow lines, and then we could just kind of set other areas where we do our warping, like so. So let me know if that's what you mean by wrap. I'm assuming it's warp, but let me know if we need to see more from that. And thanks for joining us from Taiwan, or is it middle of the night there probably? Great. So we see Yoink from Chicago says, wow, amazing. Thank you, Greg. You are the man. It's like, well, thanks for being on the live stream and asking good questions. All right, wonderful to see Grant Nicholas from Baltimore on. Hope you're well, buddy. Great to see you on. Enjoyed seeing your pictures on Facebook from a recent gig you did. All right, and Jazz Dude's also mentioning another great distortion tool is Quadrafuzz version 2. So let's say if I want to take... It's just a great kind of multi-band distortion, so I'll just put this on a quick... We'll try just even on a jazz drum loop. If we come over here to your distortion and go to Quadrafuzz. So here we could have different types of distortion in different frequency ranges. So let's say I want tube distortion on the kick drum. And we could kind of adjust. But let's say on kind of the mid-range here, we'll solo this. Say like maybe our hi-hats here. We could choose to say, okay, I want this to be maybe decimator, so that we could kind of bring up different levels of distortion. So we'll unsolo that. And all sorts of great presets. So if you want to come over here. And then you could even add different echoes in if you wanted to on different frequencies. So some great kind of distortion in here. So if you want to add some character distortion, Quadrafuzz version 2 is a great choice for that. Okay, so we see just a question from Taiwan. It says, yes, I drag a drum sample in Cubase and I want it to follow my project tempo. All right, so let's say my project tempo here is, I want to take this drum loop. All right, so within the, if I preview it, and we see in the MediaBay that we could preview, if I preview that sample, I'm going to drag this in. And I don't have the preview on, and we notice that doesn't fit the project tempo. But if I come over here, I'll remove this track. And now, if I turn this preview on and I drag it over, it's automatically going to, follow the particular tempo. So, and if it's not, just click on the loop. If it has the tempo information, come here and place it into musical mode. So if we come over and I change my tempo here from 120 to 100 to 128, it's automatically going to follow or if we add a tempo track, So once that is in musical mode, so you can select the event. So now if I take it out of musical mode, it's playing in the original tempo regardless of what the tempo is. Now that it's in musical mode. Then it will automatically follow. So sorry for misunderstanding. All right. All right. All right. So InDrop asks, "Hi Greg, I just joined, so please ignore someone already asked. Why was the UR22C rebranded as the UR-XC Yamaha product instead of Steinberg? Any new features? Thank you." So I think, I think the hardware is exactly the same. It's just that Steinberg is going to focus on software and Yamaha is going to be focusing on hardware. So, which kind of makes sense. Our area of it, the hardware, the UR22C, we did, a joint collaboration on the software and the drivers, but the hardware is manufactured and distributed by Yamaha. So it just kind of makes more sense to have the Yamaha as kind of the hardware brand and Steinberg for software solutions. So since we didn't actually design the hardware and Yamaha did, with, in careful collaboration and cooperation, it just makes sense to go forward to have the hardware kind of Yamaha branded in the future. So. Jazz Dude has a great point. Says never underestimate stock Cubase plugins. They are the best. And Chris Slim made a video on it today. All right, wonderful to see Peter joining from Montreal. I was just thinking earlier in this live stream, it's like, oh, we haven't had Peter in a while. So it's wonderful to see you back. I hope you're doing well. See, Grant Nicholas just says he uses his Steinberg amps religiously. All right, Balsa asks, question, is there a preference to hide send effect tracks that appear in the project windows when added to a track? There's two different approaches to it. So there's not a way to necessarily add it. A lot of people like to have the particular effects, but let's say if I come over, if you want it kind of out of the way, there is a method where you can kind of tuck it away. So let's say if I'm here and I want to put a reverb on my snare, when we go to add an effects channel track, we have two options of create inside folder or create outside folder. So let's say, okay, I have a delay and I want to create that inside the folder. So what that means is that goes into an effects folder. So I say add track. And then when we go to the bottom here, it's going to be kind of tucked away into an effect track. If we choose outside of folders, let's say I go to this track and I want to add an effects track to that particular track and we choose to be outside the folder, it would be placed directly below the selected track. So we come here and then the effect track is there. So pay attention to when you add an effects track. If it's going to be, we could think inside folder is going to be tucked away at the bottom in the effects folder. And when we say create outside folder, that's going to be below selected track. So let me know if that's kind of what you're looking for. You see Jazz Dude saying good morning to Taiwan, or user in Taiwan. Sorry, can't read the language. Says we traveled around the globe, so it's always fascinating for me to see people from all over the world on the live streams. All right. Let's see, Fly-V just says nice guitar amp rack. Jazz Dude says he uses the bass amp for fat guitar metal sounds sometimes as well. All right, so we see Fly-V's going to get off at 3 o'clock, so you go see his parents this weekend. Have a wonderful time with your parents. All right. John Koskin just mentioning he's right between Milwaukee and Chicago, three kilometers from Lake Michigan. It's a little more exciting than I care for. So, yeah, you're in my thoughts, kind of watching everything going on in Chicago, which I've been to a gazillion times. All right, and we see our user from Taiwan. It's 4 a.m., so thanks for joining us in the middle of the night. All right, so we see Ted Springman asks, hi Greg, I want to use Spectral Layers 12 to stem out drums, then use Groove Agent 5 for drum replacement. So for example, the snare drum I export to MIDI, but then how will Groove Agent know which MIDI note plays the correct sample? All right. Okay, so let's go back to our unmixed project that we had. All right, and I'll unmix the drums here for us. Okay, so let's say here we have kind of our, and let's say I want to replace like the kick or snare in this project. So we'll just listen to it. All right, so I'm going to drag my drum track out. All right, now that we have my drum track separated, what I want to do is within Spectral Layers, or I just actually do it in Spectral Layers here. So we'll choose just revert this quickly, hang on. Take a different approach on this. Okay, so we have our drum layers. I'm going to select the drum layer, and then we will come over here to our modules, and we'll say unmixed drums. Okay, this may take a minute or two. All right, so what we've done in this song is we've taken a 2-track mix. We kind of split up the vocals, guitars, drums, bass. We could do, piano, brass, but we're also now going to take the drums and split the drums out. So once we get our drums, like our drum sources, I'm going to then just use the hit point detection on like the kick or snare. And then once we do the hit point detection, it's going to allow us to pick a particular MIDI note that we want to use. All right, we're about 35% done. And then we could just have that sample play back inside a Groove Agent or any other sampler, anything that responds to MIDI. Okay, we're about 60% done with this. We have about 51 seconds remaining. right. All right, just about 15 seconds more. Okay, so this I want to be able to like replace just the, or augment the kick or snare in a particular like 2-track mix. All right, so now I want to take, so let's say my snare track. I'm going to drag out my snare track. Okay, so now we listen to it. So I'm going to load up Groove Agent or anything. So let's just come over here. We'll try. All right, so let's say we want that like very compressed snare. All right, so that when we go to that snare is on D1. I'm going to go to this particular track here. Let me just bounce. I'll do duplicate version so we can always go back. I'm going to bounce the selection. All right, so we're going to come over here to our hit points. I'm going to select my Groove Agent track. So we'll come over to the hit points, and I want to just do just a quick edit on the hit points. So we'll adjust kind of our threshold and maybe our intensity. Okay. Then we have this little create sub-menu that pops up here, and we want to say create MIDI notes. We want to retain the same dynamic velocity that's in the track, and here's where we choose the pitch. So we're going to say, I'm going to put it onto D1, and I have this Groove Agent track selected, and we'll say our first selected track, which is where we have Groove Agent. I hit OK, and now we could come over here. And this is all playing from Groove Agent now. So we could have the original snare and augment it with the Groove Agent. So let's mute the snare. And if I want to play with like other kits, so now just come over here to this snare. And let's tune. Let's add more overheads or rooms. Again, if we mute the snare. So once again, just unmix the drums within Spectral layers, and then you could, I just rendered it and within the hit points of this particular file, and then make MIDI notes and assign that. And when we do the create MIDI notes, we choose the pitch there, and from there we could just load in any sample and replace snares, kicks, or augment. It's a great tool for being able to kind of fix older tracks where you wanted to modernize the kick or snare pretty easily. Okay. See, Michael Pierce is just saying 100 beats per minute felt like 1998, as does 80 beats a minute. All right. Everyone's impressed with our attendee from Taiwan for joining at 4 in the morning. So, all right. Roland Stepp says, "Hi Greg, thanks for suggesting a modulator to control the frequency EQ parameters. Can you please remind me how of the control lane option to manually draw in changes on those same parameters? Thanks." All right. So if we wanted to, take, let's say on this track, we wanted to go to our EQ. So we'll come over here to frequency. All right. So we have our frequency EQ. So if we wanted to manually draw that in as well, let me just get the correct plugin open. So say we're on channel 4 and we want our frequency. So if we right click, we could just say show EQ4 frequency automation track. All right, so I'm going to do that. And now that parameters automation track is automatically opened up and opened in the automation lane. So now if I wanted to just kind of draw in automation here, I could select this particular automation and let's just duplicate that. So Control or Command D. So now if we wanted to play this, we could have our snare automated. So again, with like the included plugins, all VST3 plugins could do this. Not all of them are smart enough to implement it, but just right click on a parameter and then you could say show EQ4 frequency in the automation track, and then you could just grab one of the line tools, and there's several different line tools that you could use. So even if we wanted to do different parabolas, sine wave, triangle, square wave, you could do that if you didn't want to just use the modulators. So either way, as long as you're happy about it. So like that, I remember that snare trick was Billy Squire, Everybody Wants You. If you listen, I think during the chorus, they just kind of have like a filter sweep. Like I think every verse has a different kind of filter setting on the snare track. Just something that just popped in my head just doing that. So, but it's kind of a cool production trick. See, Jazzy's recommending the Ampeg SVT bass stack sound with the fat metal guitar. He says he played the hardware, it's really loud. So, yeah, Ampegs are good. I'm a big Ampeg guy. I've been a loyal Ampeg user for 40 years. So I was happy when Yamaha acquired Ampeg. All right, so we have Algis Romanowskis just saying hi, so thanks for joining us. All right, so we have a question from Rick at Bratman Studio. Greg, when Hans Zimmer records his synths, is he using Cubase as a set of tracks and then adds the orchestra on top of that, or lays down tracks to Pro Tools and Studios, or what's the procedure? Thanks. So I think depending on the project, Hans is lucky that he gets to use lots of wonderful, great musicians in his projects. So, and I think, he takes that, as kind of a cultural responsibility, because he cherishes great musicians. And he always wants to surround himself with the best musicians, and he wants to make sure that great musicians are viable and can work with him. So I think a lot of times, it's going to be layered together finally. I think probably most of the dub stages may not be running Cubase, but, the vast majority of the work, like months and months of work will be done in Cubase, and maybe they'll blend that in other systems depending on what the studio has. But there's a lot of times also where, real musicians, I think, have been recorded, and I know I've been with him, and he's like, oh, see this part here, we recorded the orchestra, but we ended up just going with the samples. And he's like, I can make it so no one can tell. So I think it could vary depending on what instrumentation is required for the project. It's like obviously, I think we did, was it Interstellar, so he's probably the only guy who did a science fiction kind of time travel space movie where all the music was done with a church organ, like a pipe organ. So, it's a very bold thing to do, but, Hans is great at making that work. So, but, vast majority of the productions, is, and the creative process is going to be done entirely in Cubase. All right. So Algis Romanowskis says, Greg, is all that third-party stuff like Universal Tape emulators just a hoax, or Steinberg Magneto and Tape Saturator more than enough? I would say that you could get great results with the included plugins. I would really utilize, if I was buying a bunch of plugins, I would, I don't purchase a lot of plugins because of with the stock available tools that are part of Cubase and are so great. And Steinberg's been doing plugins, longer than many other companies. We're probably the second or third company to do plugins going back to, 1994. We obviously invented it, the most widely used plugin format in the world. So I would really try to exhaust all of the possibilities, and it's like I remember when UAD first came out and their kind of counterpunch, their equivalent, their competitors at the time was TC Electronics, which came out, I'm just trying to remember, the Power Core. So similar concept, like a powered DSP card, and they both had like an LA2A, and they both had 1176s. And people would comment and they would compare them at the time and say, oh, they sound different. Why? And it's because, the hardware unit that was modeled by TC Electronics was different than the hardware model that was manufactured, that was used from Universal Audio. So they both sounded like their actual units, but those two actual units didn't have the same consistency in the production, and they sounded different. So both were right, but they were just different flavors. So, really kind of play around with, I would, don't underestimate the included tools and solutions and plugin offerings that you get with Cubase. So, I think I would exhaust all those possibilities first. All right, so Balsa just says, actually found out that record-enabled tracks that are hidden will still record whatever input you have. Not sure where it's useful, but it's a cool trick. Yeah. Sometimes if, I've used that scenario when, like for live recording, and I'm recording to two different sources at the same time. So if you're recording to an internal drive and you want to back up to like a portable drive simultaneously, I've seen scenarios where someone's like, the tracks aren't lining up. Why is that? So I've done recording sessions. I did a recording at like our corporate kickoff. We have a big concert at Yamaha for our yearly corporate kickoff. So I did the recording for that, and sometimes people looking at it, it's like, oh, why, there's too many tracks you're recording, what's going on? And it's like, one is going to the internal drive and one is going as a backup, a redundant backup to a portable drive. So sometimes having that portable drive hidden, and sometimes you may want to, not let people know that you're recording all their tracks on a portable drive, whether it's ethical or not. So I see Val just says, thanks so much, Greg. I finally got that Project Logical Editor right. More and more I try to understand this mystical tool. So yeah. So with incredible flexibility sometimes comes complexity. So, it's always interesting when a DAW first comes out and people will always be like, oh, this DAW is so easy to use. And it's because it has no features because it's brand new. And as features get added, the workflow gets more complex. So, but we're glad you got it sorted out. All right, Gareth's question. Basic thing I've forgotten is how to set default MIDI input device for inserting new instruments. So if you go to add an instrument track, you could actually just kind of set the MIDI inputs right here. So let's say, okay, I want this coming from my DAW to Stream Deck port. So I can say, okay. And then when I go to add another instrument track, it will retain that particular input that's been set right there. So most people just have it set to all MIDI inputs, but whatever input port you select, that will be maintained until it's changed again. So when you go to add an instrument track or add a MIDI track, you can set the MIDI input port and MIDI channel there, and that will stick until you select another option. All right, Roland Stuff says, thank you, Greg. I'd forgotten to right-click on the show and automation track in VST3 plugins, but I also really like the modulation-driven EQ sweep. Sounds cool. Yeah, that did sound kind of cool. I always liked that song. It's a project I worked on when I was like, this might be like 33 years ago. So almost got signed with that project. So it would have been a bitter record producer. All right. All right, let's jump to some questions that were mailed in. Thanks for all the great questions. And if you've learned something new, make sure you hit the like button, leave a nice comment so I could copy it into my monthly report. All right. All right, so we had this question on the last live stream of how to create a MIDI patch script using the MIDI Device Manager. All right, so this way we could kind of type in our own patch name scripts. So let's take a look at how to do that. So we're going to go to our studio menu, and let's get to more options to our MIDI Device Manager. So I'm going to add a new device. So we're going to say install device. We'll say define new. All right, so we could give it a name. So we'll just call this October 10th, 2025. All right, now one of the tricks that you want to do that's really easy, we're going to define our MIDI channels, but we want to make sure that we check this right here, this preset reference. We're going to hit OK. Then we're going to open the device. And let's select the correct one. So let's say our October 10th, 2025. Let's open the device. We're going to come over and we'll see our device and we'll say patch banks. We're going to click enable edit. Right click here. We're going to add multiple presets. So we'll say OK. So now we can have 127 presets if we want to create another bank of presets, we could just come right over here. All right. And let's add multiple presets again. So this will add 127 presets for our program changes. All right. So now when we want to come over, we could just say, okay, we want to enable edit. All right. And now we'll just type in whatever the name of your patch is. All right, these are all the best synth preset names, which is always kind of an interesting art form. All right, so now when I go to add a MIDI track, so we'll go to add MIDI track, our instrument, we wanted to set it to be our October 10th, 2025, whatever instrument that is, we're going to make a MIDI part, we choose our MIDI channel. Now when we come over here, we'll see below the MIDI channel off, and then we could see all of our patch name scripts that we have typed in. So now we'll just go through your 127 presets, and you could have multiple banks of different presets. So again, when you go to make your device, so we'll go to your studio, go to more options, to your MIDI Device Manager. And then when we go to install device, define new, make sure that you have this checked. And then at that point, just come over to open the device, select the patch banks. You can do your bank assignments here. So, but go to your patch banks, enable edit. Come over here and double click and type away. All right, so we had a question. So I want to take live recordings I've made, detect the beat, which I could do, but then straighten it out to a fixed tempo, removing slight rubato and minor variant tempos so that playing along and adding virtual instruments to sweeten will be easier. Okay. So let's just do a new project here. To import an audio file. Okay, so let's say we'll take this particular track. All right, so this track isn't playing to the click. All right, so if we want this to follow a steady click, I'm gonna go to my project menu, tempo track, and we'll do our tempo detection. All right, so if we look at kind of our tempo, we're roughly like fluctuating like 120 to 132. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to come over here and we're going to change the meter, and this doesn't really make a difference for our tempo detection. So I'm going to make it 4/4 instead of 7/4. All right, now the trick is we want to kind of set, let's say we want it to be roughly, let's say 126, we'll say, because we're going from like 120 to 132 at points. So what I want to do now is to select this particular tempo, go to Audio, to Advanced, to set definition from tempo. All right, and we could save this in a project or put that metadata. So this is basically taking all the tempo meta changes and putting it in here. I could just come over here. I'm going to turn off the tempo map. And now I'm going to type in 126. And now it's playing back a perfectly steady 126 beats a minute. So every beat is slightly speeding up, fluctuating to now play back a perfectly steady tempo. And if I wanted to play back the original tempo, I could activate the tempo track. So I want to be perfectly steady. So again, the missing step that you're doing, but now, once you have the varying tempo, once you have the tempo detected, your MIDI stuff will line up on a grid to it as well. So, but you should be, just go to audio, to advanced, to set definition from tempo, and then you could just turn the tempo track off, and this will play back at a steady tempo that's defined there. All right, so we have a question mailed in. Hello, I spent hours yesterday trying to follow a tutorial on using Halion. I cannot find how to open the program tree, also preferences for user interface to the program tree can be used. I read right through the whole manual on Halion Sonic 7, still cannot find out how to bend through several tutorials. Nothing I can't find. In the program mentioned, please point me in information, Graham. All right, so there's a difference between Halion and Halion Sonic. So Halion Sonic is like a free player that plays back instruments created in Halion, but Halion is like a software sampler. So if we open up, probably what you have is going to be Halion Sonic, and this doesn't offer all of the sound creation ideas, but any library that's created in Halion we can do and play back. So when you go to edit, if you wanted to edit like how every sample is done, this is not the role for Halion Sonic. So probably the tutorial you're watching was going to be on Halion 7. So we open this up. Now we can come over here. Let's do like a multi-instrument, and we load up, different sounds. So let's say if we want to look for, let's see if I think we may have some. All right, so now when we come over here, this is where, when we have different instruments and we say, okay, we want to be able to, edit. So we want to be able to come over here. We have kind of a macro editor. But now here's where we could go to your browser and see kind of your file tree of every sample that's being kind of utilized in particular instruments. But here again, two different instruments. I think that probably the tutorials you're watching were on Halion, and that's great if you want to design your own instruments, sample and create instruments, and then those instruments can be played back inside of Halion Sonic. So, all right, let me just get my computer back up here. Give me a second. All right, we have a question from Australia. It says, if I use my Cubase Pro 14 license to crossgrade to Nuendo 14, can I still use the Cubase 14 license to upgrade to Cubase 15 when it eventually releases, or does Cubase 14 license forever remain capped at version 14 after a crossgrade? Might be good to take advantage of the 25 years Nuendo deals and have both programs. So I saw the comment from Timo Wildenhain, who's the Nuendo project manager, and it may have been to you on the Nuendo forums, but it used to be a technical reason with the e-licenser that we had, if you upgrade it from Cubase to Nuendo, that it would deactivate your Cubase license, but now under the Steinberg licensing, that's no longer the case. So your Cubase 14 can still run and still be updated independently of your Nuendo 15. So if you're going to take advantage of the current 50% off for the 25-year anniversary, that's a great time to jump in to Nuendo with that. Okay, answered that other question already. All right, so we see, hi Greg, what is the best way to correct a wrongly played chord in an audio file, like in SampleLab or others in Cubase or Spectral layers? And it says, will there be MIDI extractable from audio in Cubase 15, like Song Master Pro software? It's been able to do it for 2 years. So I can't really comment on future things that are coming with 15, but currently our audio to MIDI detection is going to be for monophonic sources. I think sometimes when you work with other tools that, I haven't seen one that has worked flawlessly for kind of what my expectations are. So I would always be a little leery, just because, Steinberg generally tends not to do something for the sake of having a feature. They want it to be implemented to a very high level of integration so that, because it's kind of what our customers expect. So, but currently, reliably, we could do monophonic sources. So, but, and if you try other tools, you may realize that they're, perhaps not as strong in the quality that our customers would expect. All right, let me just quickly jump back to our questions here. Okay, so we see question, I upgraded Cubase to Cubase 14 recently. I want to know if there's function that Greg most recommends, new functions in Cubase 14. I like the pattern editor. I also, like the pattern editor and probably the modulators were like two of the biggest themes. I love having the Dorico notation engine built into Cubase and being able to import and export Dorico projects because I do a lot of notation work as well. So having that kind of marriage of technologies, I think, is really great. And what a lot of people had wanted to be able to start something off in Cubase and hand it directly to Dorico for like final engraving. So those are some things for me, but I tend not to think of Cubase for my personal reasons, just my kind of responsibilities and job role. I'm always trying to think of how Cubase is great for your use. But if there's any like types of projects that you're doing, I could probably maybe point out a feature that's applicable for like, the projects and type of projects that you're working on. Like some people may be doing EDM stuff and do modulators all day and will never open the score editor. And some people will spend a lot of time in score editor doing orchestral mock-ups, and it's like, what's a modulator? I don't need that. So, but all of those new great features are, incredibly viable, but they could be for different customers, which is great. All right, so we see Rick from Bratman Studio just says, this is the weirdest thing. Sometimes my keyboards start playing themselves, ghost in the machine, like if it may play a phrase, chord, or something previously played by me out of nowhere. Ideas or ghost. Sometimes what can happen, so let's say I come over here and I play just a little bit of, I'm just messing around. You know, if you can hit a button and just all of a sudden, you know, okay, I want to insert as a linear recording, and then, you know, like the MIDI data can be captured. So if I just come here, so anytime that you're kind of just playing, noodling around, it's being recorded into a buffer. And then, you know, there are, I forget what the keyboard shortcut is, but you could just simply come right over there, and if you hit the wrong button on the transport, it could automatically be populated into the track. So it's like a retrospective record. So maybe it's a retrospective record thing. You know, sometimes when machines and their you know, their computer processors are dying, especially kind of like, you know, 35-year-old synthesizers, you know, maybe they're you know, like little batteries starting to go bad, parts get worn out, you know, it's going into its HAL 2001 mode of life, you know, then, you know, it might be just kind of randomly spitting out stuff as well. I've seen weird behavior on keyboard workstations that are, you know, where the battery's getting low. Okay. All right, wonderful to see Lawrence checking in from Barn Door Recording. Good to see you from Rhode Island. All right, so we see Bass Arocious says, hi, Cubase users can participate today, but I watched and learned. Thanks, Greg. So I always love your username as a bassist. So we're glad that you learned some new tricks. All right, so we see a question from from You Ain't Chicago. It says, could you walk us through your sample editing process, trim, pitch, etc., in order to bounce the sample for use in another project, like those guitar parts we demoed earlier, if we want new files for a remix? All right, so I think it was the guitar project. See the VST amp rack. Okay, so like if I wanted to export these, you know, so you can just, you know, make sure, like, you know, check the beginning and end, which I probably have done, but, you know, there's no sense having like a bunch of guitar amp noise or just, you know, stuff at the beginning. So you could always kind of just trim the starts and ends. I would probably just, like, if I was exporting this to be used in our projects, I would probably select all the events. I'm going to activate the project. And I would come over here to export selected events. And then I could just say, okay, I want to put these into, we'll choose a location. So let's put these into my desktop, and we'll make a new folder. Call that folder October 10th, 2025. Okay, and we could do these as separate events. We want to do it dry. We could include, let's say, the channel settings for the guitars. We could do it, you know, we want to do a custom name. So we'll say VST amp rack, and then we could have naming schemes. So we can say, okay, we want to do VST amp rack, and we want to also say, okay, we're going to do the event name. We want the project name, and let's do like a counter, or let's do like, I think let's do a free text. And we'll put, for the free text, we'll just say October 10, 2025. Okay. Here, I'll just... All right, so now I hit OK, and then we'll just say export. And this way I don't have to like set up a bunch of markers and like okay, so we'll just export all these files and we're going to put the inserts on. And now we'll come over. Let's get to our Finder. Let's come over to our desktop. And now all of the audio files, we can see the name, the project name, and today's date automatically assigned to them. So that's some of the stuff that I would do. Okay, wonderful to see Gerald Ely joining us from Martinez, California. All right. And Michael Teams is fast on the draw with 1 gallon of chocolate eclair ice cream. Okay. All right, so we see Val asks, what's the sonic difference between rendering through the control room versus the master bus, assuming identical effects change? So, any effects that are in the control room are not going to be applied to the rendered file or the output file. So the control room processing is strictly for output monitoring. So it's kind of completely independent and has no impact at all on exporting files. So that's why it's a great place to do something like SonarWorks, which would allow you to do like room correction for your studio. So like you may want that on what you're hearing from your speakers, but you don't want those EQ and filter changes, those corrections to be applied to your audio file. So any processing in the control room is not included in the rendered or exported files. It's strictly for your monitoring purposes. So it's great to have those two separate, distinct things. All right. So you see Bratman Studio just says, Hal, open the bay doors. Hal, oh please, don't say it so. Could be my Roland XP80. Yikes, I could be in another room, walk back in, and it's playing something from 5 to 10 minutes ago. Yeah. So interestingly enough, if it's an interesting Steinberg history, I think Halion was named Halion because it did come out in the year 2001. So maybe that'll be a trivia question later. All right. All right, so we see from Ewing from Chicago says, wow, that was perfect, very smooth, and everything was so organized. All right, it says, thank you, Greg. So, all right, Ewing from Chicago just saying, let's go Cubs. All right. All right. Gerald Ely's just saying it's 70 degrees Fahrenheit there. Only hot to direct sunlight, great for golf. Hope you got out to play today. All right, so I think we're at the end of questions. We'll see if there's any more that sneak in. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Thanks for all the great questions, and I hope that everyone's learned a new tip or trick. And if you have, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that, and let other people know about the live streams. All right, we'll see if there's other questions, and there's usually about 20 to 30 seconds from when I talk to when you guys hear it, especially towards the end of a live stream. All right, so we see All right, so we see from Jazzy Lamel who asks, "Hi Greg, is there a way to hear the effects of a reverb or another plugin coming into Cubase?" So if you want to like isolate the reverb, so let's say if we're here and let's say I'll just take the reverb off here. Let's see if there's any post effects on it. So I'll take the reverb off. So let's say we have a dry reverb on this track. I'm going to, let's add an effects track. So let's say I want to do like maybe a spring reverb from Reverence. So we'll just come over here. Let's go to spring. All right, so let's say if we go to our mix console, and if we wanted to only listen to the reverb, so like often when we saw the reverb, we hear like the source track as well. But if we're utilizing the control room, we just adjust a level here. Now we get here just the reverb as opposed to. So you could just kind of click on the listen bus and we could actually just kind of and that way we're only hearing the reverb itself right there. So all right, so Val just says, what a nice stream today. Very much enjoyed it. Yeah, so thanks for, I think thanks need to go out for everyone to ask cool, interesting questions. All right, so Salvo, this is Chow Un, info, paracheck, Cubase, non-export, MIDI 1, export cello. All right, let me just run this through my translator, make sure I have it right. I think it's in Spanish, maybe Italian. Let me just hang on 1 second. Let's put it into my Google Translate. All right, so we see I need some info on why Cubase doesn't export MIDI 1 and only exports in format 0. All right, so let's come over here. All right, let me just do a new project. All right, so ironically, type 0 MIDI files are actually in all on one MIDI channel, and type 1 MIDI files are all spread apart. So let me just put in some MIDI data here. Okay, so let's go ahead and export this as a MIDI file. We don't have to have it selected. Okay, so we go to our file menu, export MIDI file. All right, we'll give it a name. So here we could choose to export it as type 0 if you specifically choose that, or you could export it as type 1 by default. So I'm going to come over here. So let's do a new project. import MIDI file. So let's go ahead and we'll put it into our existing. So let's get to our desktop. See if it shows up under recents. Maybe not. All right, so here's our MIDI file we just made. Let me see if I did it right. Hang on. Let me see if I had it. All right, so again, we'll just come over here. I'm not sure why it's not, maybe it's not being routed to anywhere. So I probably just didn't have anything routed to it. But you could export as type 1 or type 0. We just... And there you see, so that's a type 1 MIDI file. So it looks like, you know, it'll do both. But again, if you come over here to settings, and you could adjust this in your preferences, under MIDI to MIDI file to export as type 0, which is kind of used for hardware sequencers like Roland MC500s and of that generation brother MIDI sequencers, stuff like that. Okay. See radar of the band, Randy's got jet. All right. Gareth and Michael teams wishing everyone a happy weekend. All right, so I think we are at the end. I'll give it another like 10 or 15 seconds and see. If there's any last minute questions before we wrap up. I want to wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy. And we'll be back on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Come back with many more questions. And if you want to send questions in advance, you can always send them to clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right. Okay, so I think we are out of questions. We're about 3 minutes to go. I'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks again for making this such a wonderful community. It's always wonderful. I feel privileged just being able to help so many people with their Steinberg solutions, and always grateful for all the help and such a wonderful community that we have all built together. With that, we will go ahead and wrap up, and we'll see everyone back on Tuesday starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you back on Tuesday. Take care.